Welcome to In Her Voice. My name is Kelly Covert, and I am passionate about helping women live authentically by listening to their inner voice. Get ready to be inspired by women of all walks of life that have set aside their should-bes and not good enoughs and are standing in their true voice, the voice of wisdom that each and every one of us has inside. Hello, this is Kelly, and you are listening to In Her Voice. And can I just take a minute and say thank you so much? Thank you for inviting me into your ears, into your space, into your day. That really means a lot to me. And I have an awesome guest today. Her story is just like, it's going to blow your mind. And Amy Scher is with us today, and she is talking about how your emotions can heal your body. And really, we didn't go into this aspect of it, but I think it can heal even more than your physical body. And it is just so good. Let me read you her bio because you are going to want to hear it. Amy Scher is the best-selling author of How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, and This Is How I Saved My Life. Her forthcoming book, How to Heal Yourself from Anxiety, will be out in 2019. As an expert in mind, body, spirit healing, she is often lovingly referred to as an accidental guru. She uses energy therapy techniques to help those experiencing emotional and physical challenges to move on and heal permanently and completely. Amy has been featured in CNN, The Huffington Post, CBS, Cosmopolitan, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and more. Her books have been endorsed by New York Times bestselling author Elizabeth Gilbert, Vikas Swarup, and other notable authors. Amy lives in New York City with her beautiful wife and 2 bad cats. She teaches at retreats and conferences nationwide. Most importantly, she lives by her self-created motto, when life kicks your ass, kick back. Oh my gosh, you are going to love Amy, and you're going to love the wisdom and the story and the just inspiration that she has to share with you. So let's get right to our interview with Amy Scher. Amy Scher, welcome to In Her Voice. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Oh my goodness. And I have a feeling this is going to be like such a good interview because it has taken us so long to finally get together. And so I can't wait to see what comes of it.
Yes, it's going to be worth the wait for sure.
100%. So today what we're talking about and digging into is this topic that I so love and am super interested in. And that is how our emotions can heal our bodies. And also, because they can heal our bodies, that means they also can hurt our bodies, which I think is a super interesting thing to think about. And I thought we would start with your story because it's a super powerful story because you have learned this lesson and this wisdom through personal experience.
Yes, a lot of personal experience that I never set out to learn, but here we are.
Funny the way that works.
I know, right?
Uh-huh. So what was your experience in healing your own body with your emotions?
So my experience was, I'm going to be 39 now, but when I was in my early 20s, I was having a lot of physical symptoms that were later, after about 7 years, diagnosed as chronic Lyme disease. So at some point I was bitten by a tick. I didn't know it. I contracted Lyme disease. It went undiagnosed and misdiagnosed for many years. And by the time it was diagnosed properly, I had severe nerve damage. Almost all of my organs were affected. I had arthritis, brain lesions that threw my balance off and affected my vision. I had a lot of physical symptoms and went on a journey to try to heal those physical symptoms, including flying all the way to India for an experimental stem cell transplant. So I was really on the track of I'm going to heal this. And I had exhausted sort of all the possibilities in the United States. I did all the typical treatments for Lyme disease. I did all the alternative treatments. And by the time I got to India for this experimental stem cell transplant, I was really at a point where that treatment was either going to kill me or cure me. And it was a real turning point for my life to have to make that decision and sort of follow my intuition on. I know my doctor told me not to do this. I know this seems like it's not a great idea because it's experimental and it's, not FDA approved and all those things that really scare us. But my intuition was really telling me just go, just go, just go. And
Mm.
so I packed my suitcase and my lovely, amazing parents who had never been out of the country. And we went to Delhi, India for almost 9 weeks so that I could undergo this experimental stem cell transplant. And the treatment there really helped me to rebuild my immune system, my nervous system, sort of revitalize my organs that were so damaged, not only from the Lyme disease, but also from all of the harsh medications that I had taken for so long. And I thought, oh, great, now I can go home and get on with the rest of my life. I got over that. And I went home and started living my life again. And I was really mostly recovered. I was almost off all of my medications. I had arrived in India in a wheelchair and I left sort of like running through the airport because I almost missed my flight. I mean, it was a huge, huge improvement in my physical body. And so when I got home, I went back to living my life the way that I always did, which I thought was a fine way to live. I felt like I was a really positive person, and I had a great family, or I have a great family, and I felt like I lived a very happy life. But what happened to me was it was about a year after I came back, and my health started to unravel again, and that's really when I was at this huge, huge sort of fork in the road where I had to look at what other factors could be affecting my physical body. And that's what really made me turn inward to look at the inner landscape of my life, my emotions, my thoughts, beliefs. And what I found there was really shocking and scary because I felt like I was always this really positive, upbeat person, which in some way you have to be to overcome an illness like I did. But what I realized was that I wasn't great at dealing with my emotions. And I was always positive and upbeat, but I forced all of that. I wasn't dealing with my real emotions. And that's when I sort of began, I call that like the real journey toward complete health. And that was probably the hardest thing that I had to do, much harder than the physical recovery.
Mm. This is so fascinating to me because I have to be honest, when I read your bio, and it spoke of you going to India, I just sort of assumed that that's where the inner work began because it's India. And
Right.
like the land of yoga and gurus and ashrams and all of that, which is I think tells you a lot about my perspective of things, like that. I think Elizabeth Gilbert, Eat, Pray, Love, and that kind of thing. And I think it's, first of all, I just want to say, fascinating that you went there actually for a medical treatment.
Yes. And I had the same ideas. I mean, it's a kind of amazing Elizabeth Gilbert who wrote Eat, Pray, Love, one of the all-time best stories of everything, ended up endorsing my book. And when I went, her book had come out right before I went to India. When I went to India, my feeling was like I loved her story, but this was not Eat, Pray, Love. This was life or death. Like I wasn't going for any of those transformations in my mind. Of course, now I feel like the universe was laughing in my face going, "Oh, I'm going to have a different, a different plan for you," because I think a lot of the tiny seeds of change were planted in India. While I did go for a medical treatment, there was so much I had to shift within myself because the culture shock, the difference even in medical culture there, how they handle patients. They a lot of times would tell me, you have to get your mind straight and you can heal yourself. And I was there for a physical treatment, but just their mentality about healing is so differently. And I would just kind of tell myself, you have, you're here for the physical treatment. Don't let all of that bother you, because in our Western culture, and it's changed a lot, in the last like over 10 years since I went, but in our Western culture, I was used to going to the doctor. They asked me about my symptoms. They blamed the bacteria that caused Lyme disease. They changed my medications and I went home. And in India, they did really push me to, have a positive attitude and your mind matters. And I resisted that so greatly. It wasn't like they were still very medical. Everything was about the stem cells and the treatment, but they would throw in these little things that made me feel, only because of my own inability to look at it or my fear in looking at it, like, well, it's not my fault I'm sick. I was very sort of rebellious and unable to look at that piece. And I always felt like, I'm so positive, I'm already doing everything I can. And so I kind of got through the treatment, but when I got home and I relapsed, it was almost like all of those little things that were said, or little things that I picked up from the culture, or things that I had to overcome, like no hot water and food that I didn't like because I wasn't used to Indian food, and all these sort of things that I had to go through. There were so many tears in India. I felt like were sort of filed in my body somewhere, so that when I was ready to look at who I was in this world and how I was always so, you know, so hard on myself and so afraid to be blamed for something, that all of that stuff was there for me to look at it. But it wasn't until I sort of relapsed, where all of the things that I had gone through in India and all of those little seeds that were planted, like you can heal yourself and it's mind over matter. It wasn't until I got home that I was really able to integrate that, because in India, I was in such life or death. Like I was in such survival mode.
Yeah. Well, and it's all about the beautiful and perfect timing that doesn't seem beautiful and perfect in the moment, right?
Right. And there's so many of us who have this view of India or going to Thailand or wherever it is, where it's like there's gurus and ashrams, and that's all true. But I always say to people, you don't have to go to India to do that. Like I went to India and didn't do that. And then when I got home, I did it. And I
Right.
used so much of what I picked up there, but there's so many ways to do that wherever you are right now, which I think is a relief, because so many of us, when we feel like we need a big transformation, look for some place to go and do that. And you can do it in your everyday life.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. It's because it's practical.
Yes.
And it's sort of making that emotional, spiritual piece more available and more practical for everyone. And I kind of want to get into that, but first I want to talk about the whole blame thing, because you said, well, it's not my fault that I'm sick. And I think that this is something that we need to put words around this, right? Because yes and no is what I'm hearing you say.
Yes.
So can you talk about that a little bit more?
Sure. So, I think, and I understand so much how the fear of being blamed feels. But I also understand what powerlessness feels around illness and anxiety and depression. And I think that it's more important that we look at our participation in something, than we hold the place of, I won't let anybody blame us. So what I ended up coming to was, if it's my fault, I don't think it is, but if it's my fault, who cares? Like this whole thing about blame became such an egotistical thing for me, that I was actually blocking myself from helping myself.
Mm.
So while I was in this mode of, it's not my fault, it wasn't serving me. And when I finally came to the piece of, I don't feel like it's my fault, but even if it was in some way, does it really matter? Because it can be that it's not my fault, but if I want to get better, what I've been doing isn't working. I went all the way to the other end of the world basically. I didn't get well.
Right.
So maybe it's not my fault, maybe it is, it doesn't matter. But even if it's not my fault. It has to be my responsibility to participate in the solution, because standing here and being adamant that it's not my fault is not helping me get better. And so I just came to a place within inside of myself that didn't care if it was my fault or not, and that was total freedom for me
Mm.
to help myself in ways that I couldn't when I was standing in the place of I'm adamant that it's not my fault.
Yeah, you know what's coming up for me as you say this that's so interesting is that whenever we're thinking about blame or fault, we're automatically living in the past.
Yes.
And when we're living in the past, we're actually reliving the things that weren't good and reliving those negative emotions again and again and again.
Right.
And so then that sort of feeds into what the work that you started doing to get better. And that is really what I hear you saying, to start to take a look at those emotions and process through them. And instead of just trying to ignore them or, tamp them down, stuff them down somewhere, or cover them up with something or numb them out with something, you had to really take a hard look at what was happening inside of you.
Right. And I think that that's exactly true. What you're saying is that at some point I realized that I was very positive. I was always, bubbly, and that was only because I forced that a lot of the time. That was because I was suppressing real emotion. I always wanted to be the easygoing one, the one that, wasn't bothered by anything. I was, sort of, I feel like I'm a Virgo, but I was like born a perfectionist. I put a lot of pressure on myself. I just stuffed everything. And I'm sure everybody listening now can relate to trying to stuff emotions. And I doubt there's one person who could tell us that that works, because it doesn't, And so that is kind of what I came to. And I kind of realized, like, oh my gosh, my whole life I've been suppressing my emotions instead of feeling them and dealing with them. No wonder my body broke. Yes, I was bitten by a tick. Yes, I had Lyme disease. I had a real physical thing, as so many people do. But our bodies, our immune systems, our nervous systems can take a whole lot, but it can't hold our entire past under the surface and deal with a virus or a bacteria or whatever it may be. Our bodies just can't do it all. And so my ultimate permanent and complete healing came in releasing all of that emotional baggage, all of these beliefs about having to be perfect, and all of this pattern around suppressing my emotions. And it allowed my body to really, really heal. And that was where I found, I mean, it's so funny, after spending tens and thousands of dollars and going all across. I mean, prior to India, I had been to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota and UCLA and LA. And, I mean, I had been pretty much everywhere. And in the end, what really, really worked was turning inward. And that's not to say we should ignore medical treatment and we don't need doctors, but I think, we have to meet our medicine, whatever that is, whether it's alternative or Western. We have to meet our medicine halfway. We have to do our part to help bring up our immune system. And there's so much science now that shows that our emotions can make us sick. Our emotions are not something to be scared of, but if we suppress them, our body can only handle so much. It affects our physical system. And that was sort of the piece that I had missed during my healing, which is why I relapsed, because I just went, okay, that's checked off my list. My body's better. And then I started to recreate illness again.
Mm-hmm. I've heard it described by Joe Dispenza. We were talking about Dr. Joe, before we got on. He he does like week-long workshops in spontaneous healing and things like this. And he recently had an interview on the School of Greatness podcast, which is how I heard about him. But he talks about it as like the environment. the environment within your body, and that is affected by the physical environment, but that your emotions also have an effect on that environment, and that they can change it. And when the environment changes, that's when we become more susceptible to disease and infections and all of that kind of stuff. And I just think it's so fascinating, and it makes so much sense.
Yeah, and it really does. And we look how much time we spend on like what we eat and and exercise and all of that, but we so often look at our emotional selves last. We look at how much we're having fun last. We look at connection with family and friends last, and those things all contribute to the environment. And I talk about that in one of my books where I sort of liken the sort of human body to like a tree growing in soil. If the leaves start to turn brown, we don't like go to each leaf and try to fix it. We look at what's happening in the soil. Like, are we watering it enough? Is it getting enough sun? Like, what's happening in sort of the roots? Like, what's the problem here with the entire plant or tree? Versus when we get sick, we start chasing like this organ and that bacteria and that virus, but so rarely do we look at the whole picture, what's in our soil, which is, I mean, obviously inclusive of what we eat and exercise, but also our emotional selves, our beliefs. Do we feel like we're worthy of having love and health and a good life? Do we, spend time relaxing? All of that goes into how we're affected by sort of the external environment. And it was
Mm-hmm.
something I realized too. At first I was like, I was bitten by a tick. I got this terrible disease. But there are a lot of people who are bitten by ticks. There are a lot of people who don't end up bedridden from Lyme disease, even though the bacteria may have been transferred to them. There are a lot of people, do you know what I mean? So it is
Yeah.
our sort of constitution. And there's so much now that we can do to change that. And I think illness and depression and anxiety are such scary things because we feel like we're out of control. It's not within our control. And that's not true. We have so much that we can do, including dealing with our emotions. And I find that really exciting. I used to find it scary, but now it's like, wait, I don't have to be scared of how I feel anymore because I can find ways to work through that, let it go, and then actually move on.
Yeah. Well, it's this whole idea of responsibility, right? When we are responsible for something, that means that we played a part in that, and that's hard to wrap your head around. Like you
Right.
said, like, is it my fault that I got sick or whatever? However, also being responsible means that we also have the power to reverse it. And I think those go hand in hand, and we have to remember you can't have one without the other.
Right, right. And I sort of balanced it out in my own mind where, okay, let's just say I contributed to this illness. That didn't feel great to me. But if I contributed to it, that meant I had some participation in fixing it. And that
Yes,
felt good. And that
that
was
feels
worth
good.
it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yes.
And so that really helped me. And at the end of the day, when I started off healing, it took me almost a decade to get better. But when I started off healing, I was very, I was very like, I wanted to see like scientific evidence of the things that I was doing. And as time went on, I turned into this like person who just like, I mean, the subtitle of my book, This Is How I Saved My Life, is about, when you're willing to try, when you're willing to you're finding everything when you're willing to try anything, because that's what ended up happening was over time I was like, who cares about anything except how to make this better. And when I became open enough to only care about feeling better, and I let all my beliefs and doubts and judgments about things go, that's when I was put on the right path, and that's when I was truly able to heal.
Yeah. Oh, it's so exciting. Like, I'm getting excited just hearing you talk about it. Well, okay, so now I want to get into like the nitty-gritty. What does, because I'm sure that you're still doing it.
Yeah.
What does the work look like? How did you learn how to process the emotions? I mean, did you have a certain practice? I mean, like, what does the work look like for you?
Yeah, so for me, and it's so funny because I never set out to do any of this. I was a marketing director for Harley Davidson. Like I was in marketing. I was never into like any like alternative or holistic health stuff, but I ended up sort of creating my own techniques and my own system because, and we talk about, ashrams and yoga and all this stuff in India. I tried yoga and I didn't like it, and I could never sit still long enough to meditate. So the sort of like typical things that we hear of people doing to work through emotions just didn't resonate with me, even while I was in India. And I tried so hard while I was there to do these practices that people go all the way to India for. And so what I ended up doing was I learned something called emotional freedom technique, EFT, which
Mm-hmm.
works with basically by tapping on certain acupoints, which are used in acupuncture. Most people know about that on the body. It helps to release emotions that are stuck in the energy system, the body's energy system, or meridians, which are used again in acupuncture. I created some subconscious release techniques, some scripts that I would read about helping my subconscious let go. Because a lot of what I realized was that we're not always aware of how we participated. We're like, well, we seem like we're doing good and we're positive and whatever. But I realized that the subconscious mind controls a lot of our lives, like a scary amount of our
Yeah.
lives.
I've heard like
And
95%.
yeah. And most of the things that we struggle with get stuck in there. And it's not as easy as just telling ourselves to let it go, which is why so many people try to just like snap themselves out of anxiety or depression or illness. And we can't do it because it's not always held in a place where we can consciously access. So I created a technique that I call the sweep, which helps. I use very specific wording to help like sweep these beliefs like I can't heal, or a lot of people have these like, I'm too far gone. My doctor said I'm the most difficult case ever and it'll be hard for me to heal, like those things out of the subconscious mind. And I ended up creating really my own system, and funnily enough, wrote a book about it, something I never thought I would write, like a how-to book to help people heal. I always wanted to write a memoir, but a how-to book was not in my in my plan. Um, but where I could teach other people the techniques, because for me, I needed to use things that were simple to integrate, that didn't take hours a day. I didn't have the patience and I didn't feel well enough physically to do it. And even though meditation, I think for so many people is a really great way to become aware of your emotions and let them move through. I was so uncomfortable with my emotions that sitting with them in that way I wasn't there yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No,
And
I get it.
yeah, and so I ended up using more sort of, I would say, active release techniques like the tapping, working with chakras, again, tapping on different places in my body where emotions were stuck or held. And so everything that I either created or learned or used were like very easy things, because for me it had to be easy for me to use it. And that's the key, is for everybody out there that's looking for a way to release emotions or work through these things, find whatever works for you. Look at different books, listen to different podcasts, do whatever you have to do, but just go with whatever feels good to you, because that in the end is what I believe works. Whatever you use is going to work, right? if
Yeah.
we
Yep.
if we we are adamant about being, meditators and meditating an hour a day, but it's too uncomfortable to sit with our emotions, we're not going to do that. And then if we don't do it, it doesn't work. And so I just really allowed myself to follow my intuition and not get bogged down by everything I read on the internet about what was working for everybody else, and just really went my own way.
Yeah. One of the things that I think is so interesting about EFT, and I've done this before, I've practiced it, and I do like it, but it's one of those kind of things that it's not always top of mind for me. And
Right.
I appreciate the reminder because it's good to go back to. But when you're tapping, you have a script, and oftentimes the script includes the negative emotion or feeling that you're having. And I think that that's a really interesting that's what worked for you, since you said you didn't want to acknowledge those.
Right. And I think one of the reasons it's so funny because now I teach EFT classes all over the country, basically. It's one of my very favorite techniques. And at first I felt really uncomfortable. But what happens with EFT is that you're just talking about it so that it can come close, like up from under the surface to let it go. And it
Yeah.
really goes. I think the techniques work. That technique has worked so well for me because one of the things that kept it stuck for me was not being able to acknowledge it. And this gave me permission to acknowledge it and clear it at the same time. So while you're tapping and talking about what we would call the negative emotion, or I just say the reality of however you feel, is that you're bringing it up so that it can move out. So you're focusing on it temporarily to let it go versus constantly having to suppress it and manage it, which sort of lasts a lifetime. So
Yeah.
I kind of came to the conclusion where, like, if I deal with it just temporarily right now, then I'm done and I can move on. Whereas if I don't do that, then it's just stuck with me forever.
Yeah, so good. And I know the times that I've done EFT, you feel the moment when it passes.
Yes.
Like you just it's hard to explain if you have not experienced it, but you feel it. That it's just like it's like a release and then it's gone.
Yeah. And in my workshops, I always talk about the word emotion comes from motion, moving. Emotions want to move, but we are so adamant about holding on to them that they get stuck in our body, and they're not meant to be stuck in our body, which is why when we hold on to them, they feel so freaking bad. But they
Yeah.
don't feel bad if we let them move. They don't feel bad if you feel an emotion for 5 minutes, it's okay. It's only when you feel it for 5 years it starts to feel terrible. So that really EFT really ended up being one of the things my body needed, because I needed to see that I could feel an emotion and that it wouldn't be so painful that I would die from it, that I could actually feel it and then feel it move out and then be okay. Whereas before, I think I was really just scared to feel it.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to recommend to our listeners a great book which uses a sort of a different technique, if you will. But I highly recommend The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer. And he talks about this. He talks about letting emotions move through you, even years later when things come up, just to allow it. And I actually listened to that book, which I highly recommend because it's him reading it, and he has a very soothing voice. And it's going along with this same idea of how we can process through our emotions to be fully present and here now.
Yes. And that, I think, like, once you realize that emotions are only really, really difficult when we have to hold them for a long time, you get used to, feeling angry or feeling sad or whatever, and then going, okay, I'm fine with it right this moment. And then when it passes, you become less scared because you realize that if you're willing to just allow it, it will move. And I think so many of us, constantly talk ourselves out of, don't be mad at that person. They didn't mean to hurt your feelings. Don't be sad. You can, do this and feel better. And we're constantly trying to talk ourselves out of our emotions. Whereas I always teach, just feel as crappy as you need to feel. Let yourself feel it, and you'll see how much faster it moves,
Yeah.
and it's much more comfortable.
And you know what is a perfect example of that? Like, take a look at your 2-year-old.
Right.
Like that is what little kids do because they haven't learned how to stuff it down yet. Like they haven't been taught that. Really, we teach our kids, unfortunately, that's what one of the things that they learn either from their friends or from their parents or at school or whatever. But like a 2-year-old hasn't figured that out yet. And so when they are angry, they will let you know it. And maybe they have a temper tantrum, but then it's done.
It's over. Yeah.
So, maybe we just need to allow that a little bit more. And I think the other thing that comes up for me too is when you're doing this, it's probably a good thing for you to be in a safe space. To be, if you're going to do it by yourself, be in a place where you feel sort of comfy and like safe and held close. And if you're going to do this with someone else, make sure that that's someone that you trust and that you feel safe with, because when you can create a container around that and say, in this moment in time right now, I'm going to allow myself to feel this and I know I will be okay. That makes it a little bit easier.
Yes, of course. And also, I tell people like we get so in our head about like if we start crying, we're going to cry for hours. And if we deal with our emotions, it has to be in a way where we're like sitting on our bed by ourselves, hysterical crying to let it go. Like, I mean, I tell people you can deal with your emotions at, 5 minutes at a time. When I work with kids, I often tell them, you know, you can run in the bathroom at school and tap if you have to, or whatever they need to do.
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
and we can deal with our emotions in little bits of time, and it doesn't have to feel like an hour-long therapy session, so
Mm-hmm.
find, even if it's just sitting on your couch for 5 minutes before you go to bed, that works too.
Mm-hmm. And, with the tapping piece, if someone that is listening is really interested in knowing more about that or how to do it, do you have a resource that you would recommend for them?
I do. I mean, I wrote a book called How to Heal Yourself When No One Else Can, and I teach tapping, and there's a chapter of tapping in that book. I
Great.
also have on my website. Can I give my website? I have a
Absolutely.
free.
Yeah.
Okay, it's
Mm-hmm.
www.amy AMYB share SCHER.com, and I have a freebies section, and in there I have a 20-minute how to tap video, and just teach a video that just takes you through how to tap really simply. And it's also on my YouTube channel. So you can just watch it, follow along with me. And it's just a really simple, everybody always says, oh, I've learned it before, but the way you teach it is so easy. So I try to just be sort of relaxed, and you can't do it wrong. I work with kids all the time and teach it to them. Just to learn the basics of it can be so helpful as an everyday tool.
I love that. And we'll put links to all of those things in the show notes on my website at kellycover.com. And also right in the podcast app that you're listening to, there will be a live link. So I really want to encourage you guys. This is not something you have to go take a week-long course in or pay to learn how to do it, although you should buy Amy's book. But it's really something that's accessible for everyone, which I love about
Yeah, and
EFT.
everybody can spend 20 minutes watching the video and know enough to do it, to use it, to feel better with it, to feel empowered, like you have a tool that you can, stop to use for 5 minutes at a time before you go to bed. Or for moms, I always tell moms, just do it in the shower. Like, I know you get bothered in
Yeah.
the shower too, but I mean, you really don't have to do this work for hours a day. You just have to integrate it into your life enough that you set a new pattern. Maybe your pattern now is holding on, suppressing, and we want to, I always explain it. It's like potty training a puppy. Like, you don't just do it once. You show them like, no, you want to do this, you want to do this, you want to do this, you want to go over here. And we do that when we retrain habits in our lives too. It's like every time you want to suppress emotion, you just maybe set your phone timer for 2 minutes and you tap instead. Or you do something, whatever it is for you, but you do it often enough in small increments that you're retraining your body to do that instead of the old pattern of holding on and suppressing.
Yes. Oh, so good. So good, Amy. Well, one of the things that I feel like is a through line in your entire story, even from before you went to India, is that you listen to your inner voice.
Yes.
And that's what this podcast is about. And it's about taking these tools and using them in conjunction with listening to that intuition and trusting it. And so I would love for you to share with my listeners today, what is your inner voice asking of you in your life right now?
So I've gotten really good at listening to my inner voice, because my inner voice, even though a lot of people externally thought I was crazy, my inner voice told me I needed to go to India. And it was really part of my overall journey because of the way I struggled. And I actually later went back to India and happened to meet the love of my life there,
Oh, I love
which
that.
was such amazing confirmation that years before, when I went on my first trip, my body, I feel like our bodies somehow know where we're going all along.
Oh,
And
they
so
do. Yeah, I believe that
that
too.
was such good confirmation for me that, like, even though at the time none of it made sense, logically, that I knew intuitively that I needed to have this connection with India. And so recently, my intuition has been just telling me to slow down and relax more. And I've been really listening to that, even though it doesn't make sense because I just had a book come out, and I have another one coming out in early 2019, and I should be doing all this stuff. I'm just not, because my intuition is telling me that what I need is to continue slowing down. And so I've been enjoying listening to that, just knowing my body knows more than my brain does on this
Oh,
one.
so good. So good. And
Yes.
I really think that when we're being directed to relax and to slow down, what we ultimately end up doing is creating space for something greater. And that's what I love. You know, it's easy to get stuck in sort of the 5-year plan, and it's good to have a plan and it's good to have a vision, but it's also good to be open to something
Yes,
even greater than that.
absolutely.
Oh, fantastic. So, Amy, I just want to acknowledge you and honor you for the wisdom that you're bringing into this episode today, and for coming and sharing in a powerful way how we really do have the strength and the power and the ability to make these deep changes in our lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of In Her Voice. My one great hope is that you will take even a tiny nugget of what you heard today and apply it in your life and believe that you will see powerful changes. And here's the thing, ladies, when we take this information that is here for us, this wisdom that other people have learned, it's like the shortcut. It's like taking the shortcut. We don't have to go to India, like Amy said. We don't have to be at the lowest of lows to make a change that is powerful and meaningful in our lives. And when we listen to our inner voice and we let that wisdom guide us, amazing things happen. If you love this episode, I would love it if you shared it with a friend. Take a screenshot and be sure to tag me at Kelly J. Covert on Instagram and Facebook. You can also tag Amy. She is at Amy B. Scher. And we would love to hear your feedback. Let us know what your best takeaways were from this episode. And I just want to say, when you share with other people, you have no idea how much it means to me. It makes such a difference in the way people are coming to learn about In Her Voice and how it can change people's lives. And so you can join with me in making an impact and sharing this important wisdom with the women in your life. So thank you, thank you, thank you. As always, I want to remind you, you matter. Your inner voice matters. And when you listen to it, it will tell you day after day after day that you are worthy.